Why consider a third party? One of the responses to that is that the American people are demanding a third party. So that's like why it's really important to consider it. And, there's just been such a history of cumulative failure by the two parties, which are bought and paid for by bankers and billionaires and fossil fuel barons, and the usual suspects kind of hold a monopoly on the two major parties. So it's kind of like beyond needing an explanation. It's sort of like you'd have to explain why you wouldn't want a third party.
Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more. All to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open. Our guest today is a very special guest. I have Dr. Jill Stein with me today. She's a Harvard-educated doctor and a pioneer in environmental health advocacy. As an activist, she organizes people around initiatives that fight environmental racism and injustices to put people, planet, and peace first. Dr. Stein is also the leading candidate for the Green Party nomination in the 2024 presidential election, recently just winning Illinois for the Green Party. So congratulations, which is my state. And Dr. Stein, I appreciate you joining me today. Thank you.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much, Nick.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I love having these kinds of conversations. And I think for my guests out there, I was involved in Dr. Stein's campaign in 2016 here in Chicago. And so it's a real honor for me, little fanboy, but I'm grateful to have you here. And I'd love to start with my favorite question, which is, what did you want to be when you were growing up? And how did it land you to becoming I don't know if it's safe to say presumptive nominee for the Green Party, but I would say that.
Yeah, and on that score, we are closing in on the Green Party nomination as more and more states are holding their conventions or their primaries. We are getting close to the majority of those votes. So hopefully within 2 or 3 weeks, we can go ahead and say, title of presumptive. Hopefully, fingers crossed. It's a really exciting campaign, and that's one of many things that are actually falling in place now. And we'll get into that as we go on. Like, what did I want to be when I was growing up? I still consider myself growing up, and
Me too.
like many of us who are, what can I say? Sort of open to our potential as human beings, which is just constantly evolving. And as the times evolve, my thoughts evolve. And, so I'll say there's still a whole lot of wiggle room there. And in thinking way back to childhood, my favorite books were actually Dr. Dolittle, about this veterinarian, I think a Welsh veterinarian who could talk to animals. And like, that was my world, was really animals and wildlife. And I grew up in the Rachel Carson era with Silent Spring. So I was just really mindful of how precious, animal life is, and our place in that, in that larger picture, and how very fragile all that is, and just feeling that personal connection with animals. So that lives on for me very much.
Yeah. And my dog is my best friend. You have a cat, right?
And a dog, and they're very good friends too, and they teach me a lot.
I love that. My dog is my best friend. I love him.
Totally relate to that. Is your dog a mix, a type of dog? What?
He's a mini golden doodle. He's right here. I'm going to pick him up.
Oh, sweet.
His name's Grayson.
Beautiful.
Thank you. So, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is because I can't stand the two-party system. I'm politically homeless. I recently had Kit Cabello of Hard Headlines Media on here, and we talked about being politically homeless. And I think your message resonates with me and probably the majority of Americans. So my first question to you is, what are your reasons for running for president? You ran in 2012, you ran in 2016 on a very important message, I think. And I'm curious, what has you running again here in 2024?
I share the desperation of Americans in general who feel like we are being thrown under the bus by our ruling elites. And that's what they are. They are elites and they rule without the consent of the governed, and that's kind of like a basic violation of our essential democratic rights from the get-go, and we could go through the whole litany of how our elections are manipulated, how our policies are manipulated. It's well established by real life. If you're an advocate, if you're just a human being, or if you're an academic studying this, there's just no question that it is big money and it's economic elites who rule the day, who decide the agenda, who decide, what will and won't pass as policies. To summarize it, we are squandering half of our congressional budget, half of our discretionary dollars are being squandered right now on militarism that is very clearly, as Martin Luther King put it, my country is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. True then, true now. In fact, it's only getting more and more true. And we are really watching humanity and the planet being crushed by this outrageous militarism, which is really just pure exercise of power. There's nothing strategic about it. There's nothing successful about it. We are losing the day. We're not winning the day, and we're squandering our resources while we are making a mess of the world, creating failed states, mass refugee migrations, and a continuing set of terrorist threats. We have been losing every major conflict, but we can't seem to stop ourselves. And I don't mean we, I mean the powers that be who take their marching orders from the military industrial complex. I grew up in the Vietnam era, fighting that war that made absolutely no sense, that really created a genocide for some 3 million people in Vietnam and more broadly in Southeast Asia. And what our country continues to do is along those lines, we have, aside from these losing wars that we squander our resources on, we also overturn democracies. We are in the business of regime change, and that's been well documented as well. Some 70 or so since the Second World War, and many before the Second World War. So this doesn't work. It fundamentally doesn't work. As Martin Luther King said, we have this triple evil of militarism, racism, and extreme materialism, aka end stage predatory capitalism. It serves the very few, and it is a disaster for the many inside of this country and outside. The more we spend destroying a sense of decency and human rights around the world, the more we spend on that, the more people are deprived here at home, both of our democracy, which is also very much under assault, and just basic, cost of survival. 60% of Americans, more than that actually, are living paycheck to paycheck at a time when, Congress wants to throw another $17 billion into genocide in Gaza and expanding what is now becoming another Middle East war with all the dangers. In fact, more dangers than ever, because now Iran, when we are bombing Iranian targets, as well as 4 other countries were bombing Iranian targets, Iran now has a military pact with Russia, which is, along with the U.S. nuclear power. So this could go nuclear in the blink of an eye. It's not supposed to, but things happen in war that aren't supposed to happen. And it's like our rulers, our ruling elites are clueless, reckless, and criminal. And they need to be removed from office as quickly as possible. And I have been a part of this battle ever since I was tricked into running for office for the first time back in the year 2002, when I ran for governor here in Massachusetts. I discovered, oh my God, our elections could actually be a platform for honest conversations and for a lot of listening. And I loved that. I was tricked into running for the first time, having no idea what I was getting into. But, it wasn't kind of it didn't follow the usual playbook of how corporate elections are won. And so there were lots of just really interesting conversations that created all kinds of possibilities, because none of us are the labels that are imposed on us by Democrats and Republicans and the media and the corporations that they serve. They want us in two dividing camps with no, meaningful communications between those ends. And that was just totally false. I found that people can smell if you're a rat, and they can smell if you're not a rat. And that enabled, really important conversations to take place that have to be the basis for our governance. So once I sort of broke that sound barrier and discovered what a true politics of the people could be, I just continued to get arm twisted into running again and again. And
Somebody's got to do it.
yes. I mean, if we lived in a perfect world, this is probably not what I would be doing, but I feel like we have to do it, and that the Green Party is in a very special position because we know how to fight the power. We are blamed and shamed like American voters, and by hook or by crook, we have learned how to challenge power, how to get on the ballot, how to play this game. We know how to play it, and there's a wonderful team that's been a part of this process that was mobilized. I hadn't intended to run, and then, suddenly there was a vacancy and a need to occupy that position. So we mobilized, instantly, because there was no way we were not going to seize this incredible moment that we have now. It is a perfect storm for a peaceful political revolution. People are done being thrown under the bus. And that was true back in 2016, but it's much truer now, especially with these two zombie candidates being forced down our throats by both zombie political parties. We've never been in a more powerful moment. We've never had a greater imperative for uprising between crushing inequality, endless war, climate collapse, an assault on our democracy, and a genocide rolling out before our very eyes. There's never been a greater urgent need to challenge this, this dying imperial vision of the world. It has to be challenged, and we've never had a better moment to actually do that. So that's why I'm here, to make
Somebody,
yeah.
Somebody had to do it. I relate to what you said so much. Some of the work that I do, I don't want to be doing, but somebody had to do it. And I think, I think that's part of the reason I feel so connected to you as a candidate, is because I do believe that people who are in leadership shouldn't ascend to leadership, right? They should be elevated to leadership. And I feel that's kind of something with you.
And if I can say that in another way, that's so much what I feel. Anyone who is seeking powerful offices should be disqualified from holding them.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people share that view.
Yeah, I think more than we think. I thank you for so elegantly putting all of the challenges that we have. And I think, you look at like these wars in the Middle East, and I don't think any of the people there want those wars on either side, any side. They don't want those wars. It's the governments, it's the elites, it's the military industrial complex. It's Joe Biden saying we have enough money to fund wars. Well, we don't have enough money to house the homeless here in Chicago that I see, or the migrants that are here now in Chicago on the streets and in shelters. It's awful. So how do we fix this? Like, what's your vision for America?
Okay, and I just want to comment on what you just said, because that was such a impactful statement. One of the great crises that we're supposedly confronted with now is the migrant crisis. But where does the migrant crisis come from? These are people who are fleeing governments that have basically been overthrown by the US, or wars that we have been conducting. But particularly, like Haiti, we've overthrown Haiti twice in the last 2 decades or so, overthrown Aristide twice, who was a democratically elected president. You can go all the way back to Guatemala in the 1950s, which was one of the first governments that we overthrew, we being the CIA, overthrew the democratically elected government in Guatemala because they were proceeding to in a program of land redistribution to allow peasants, a fighting chance to actually have some dignity and self-sufficiency. They needed land. And who didn't like that? United Fruit didn't like that. And so the U.S. went in as a favor to the United Fruit, in the same way that Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, went into Haiti in order to overturn, get this, to overturn a minimum wage that had been raised to 61 cents an hour. Hillary Clinton went in for the benefit of like Levi, Jean.
Jeez.
Yeah, in order to overturn that referendum and knock the minimum wage down from 61 cents down to 31 cents. So these are the forces that America has been serving in our economic domination, et cetera, economic and military domination. We have sort of sought this dominant position in the world, all over the world, made a mess of the world. And many of those people are coming to our shores because we have had this high ideal of providing refuge and providing asylum, which is critical and important. But how about we stop generating, the waves of refugees that are coming here? So, that's part of our vision. Our vision is an America and a world that works for all of us instead of a world that works for corporations, housed largely or to the benefit largely of American billionaires, but not exclusively. But it's a very small class of billionaires who are kind of running the show and benefiting from the way governments work, including the U.S. government. And we need a government that's working for us. This is hardwired into our founding documents. The Declaration of Independence, which said that all power, just power, derives from consent of the governed. Government is supposed to be of, by, and for the people. Right now, it's not. So, that's like the overall vision here is that we, the people, are entitled to the promise of our democracy. It's always been a very extremely imperfect, compromised promise, but it's even less of a promise of democracy now. And so it's we have a series of basic proposals that have been rolled out over the last 10, 20 years even in our presidential races, starting with Ralph Nader's rollout of single-payer healthcare, it was called. Now it's an improved Medicare for all system. We need healthcare as a human right. We deserve that. We would actually save $500 billion a year on paper-pushing red tape and bureaucracy. How about instead, 1 out of every 3 healthcare dollars is paying for that nonsense? Because the health insurance and big pharma are in a position of calling the shots in both of our corporate political parties. So that's kind of a major piece of our vision that could be enacted very quickly. It's not hard to implement these systems. It's way easier than what we have right now, which is just a morass of minutia that has to be tracked, and which is unbelievably time and labor intensive. And approximately 70,000 people die every year for lack of health insurance, and it's something like 87 million who do not have adequate coverage. And that's even with us spending twice as much per capita as the next biggest spender. And we are way down on the, on the list of health parameters.
Outcomes, yeah.
Mortality, longevity, et cetera. We're doing miserably, and we're also living with lots and lots of chronic disease. We not only have a sick care system, it takes care of you when you're sick, it doesn't keep you healthy, but we have a whole system, a society-wide system, including an economy that makes us sick, that imposes stress and poverty and violence, and a very sick food system, which is corporate controlled and has been for decades.
We have the Kellogg CEO is literally telling people to go eat cereal for dinner now because it's only $1 a bowl. It's horrible.
Yeah, unbelievable. Right. Yeah, and that's making you sick even with a once a day. Yeah, and people have lost their access to food, and you name it, across the board. So all of this is kind of part of the overall plan. So just to enumerate them, major piece then is healthcare as a human right through a Medicare for all system, which will be saving us $500 billion a year, even as it expands your coverage so that it also includes chronic care. If your parents are sick, if they have Alzheimer's disease, well, guess what? Now they can stay home and you have home care coming in, which is covered for you. And, across the board, eyeglasses, dental care, mental health care, it's all covered. And it's the rules are decided basically by you and your healthcare provider. So it's a really great system. It's as good as can be, and the rest of the developed world has it. Why don't we? Because pharma and insurance companies are calling the shots. So there's one solution. Another very critical solution is the Green New Deal. which was launched actually going back to like 2010, and our 2012 campaign brought it to national attention. Now it's given lip service by the progressive Democrats, but of course they don't do anything, and they don't mention one of the most critical pieces, which is that fossil fuels have to go. It's not enough to just expand renewable energy. You have to end fossil fuels. That's what nature cares about. Nature doesn't care about renewables. People do, but nature doesn't, and the climate doesn't care about renewables. The climate cares about the fossil fuels that are poisoning the climate and virtually every ecosystem connected to the climate. So the Green New Deal would create, it's basically a New Deal type program where we, the people, through our local, state, and national government, are creating jobs that are essential for our survival. And it's a major transformational program that puts our economy back into the business of producing things. Right now, we're mostly a financialized economy, which is all about ripping off working people. A Green New Deal economy is, again, a productive economy, not a financialized one, and it transitions us into the renewable energy era and the kind of ecological era, which we have to be if we want to survive, let alone, economic benefits and all that. Just our very survival depends on making this transition as climate change, continues to accelerate before our very eyes. And we could talk about the evidence for that if there's time, but let's just focus on the proposals for the moment. These jobs that would be created as part of this economic and energy transition would focus on clean renewable energy, also on ecosystem restoration, on renewable and sustainable agriculture, as opposed to this dead end corporatized agriculture, which is exhausting our soil and our ecosystems and our water supply. I mean, it's completely unsustainable given what we're coping with right now. So these are a series of kind of interfacing solutions that are incorporated within the Green New Deal. It also includes essential social services, so teachers and nurses and healthcare providers and home health aides and things of that sort. The Green New Deal would both revive our economy while defending and protecting Mother Nature and the planet and the climate. And also it comes with an economic Bill of Rights. So the right to health care, the right to affordable housing for everyone. That's another kind of emergency right now, the housing emergency. The right to a job, which is then built into a series of jobs that transition us into the new economy. And also a right to education, including higher education, which is essential for surviving in today's economy. So that includes like either technical school, following high school, or college education. All of that should be covered. We know that education pays for itself 7 times over for every dollar spent. And student debt is an outrage that should be bailed out. We bailed out Wall Street when the crooks crashed our economy through basically their fraudulent loans and, various economic sleight of hand. Our economy went down in 2008. That's Willie, who's going to come.
Hey, Willie. That's fine.
Hi. You want to say hi? Hi.
Hi, Willie.
He's not too shy, so he'll be in full view, I'm sure, before we're done. Good boy.
Interviews next, Willie.
Maybe he'll talk with your dog.
Yeah.
We're done. So our Congress and president, which were all Democratic, it was the Democratic trifecta in 2008 when
did nothing.
And even worse, they bailed out Wall Street to the tune of trillions, while they threw out homeowners to the tune of millions who lost their homes because of these fraudulent loans. So
nobody went to jail. Nobody got in trouble. Nothing.
Exactly. And we didn't hesitate to bail them out. So, against the will of the American people who did not want the banks to be bailed out, Congress went ahead within 1 week and came up with trillions of dollars. So
They
how
can move so quickly when they want to. Like, look at the CARES Act. What was it, a 600-page bill, and that just went through like that?
That's right. Yeah. Full of loopholes and
Right.
corporate perks. And that tends to be what drives it. If there's a Wall Street benefit or if the war machine, they can do that. Don't worry about where the money's coming from, no questions asked. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what's wrong with what ails America right now. So that takes us through the Green New Deal. Um, and yeah, and then, taxing the rich, for example, who enjoyed great tax giveaways over really last many decades. The contribution of large corporations to, to the tax base. It used to be 6% of GDP after the Second World War. It's now 1% of GDP. I mean, that just tells you how much the rich are able to just get off scot-free
I
right now.
just, I always wonder why they want so much money. And then I also wonder what's going to happen when none of us have money to buy the stuff that you're selling us. Like, have they thought this far in advance? I don't know. Or maybe I missed something, but
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's kind of some of what's wrong with this picture. It just doesn't sustain. It seems to be guided by greed,
right.
and that's it. And they're not thinking, long term. It's all about
Yeah.
short-term profits and
Yeah.
you
And I
know,
think, yeah, I think one of the reasons I've always been attracted to you as a candidate in the Green Party is because you talk about policy. And, I literally had a conversation 2 weeks ago now with a friend who's just Trump derangement syndrome, hates Trump. And I asked him, I'm like, what's your top policy position? Right. And the top policy position was healthcare. And what are we going to do about healthcare? And I said, well, what if Trump came out and said he is here to support a Medicare for all system? Would you vote for him? And they're like brain broke. And I feel like so many people have just lost the fact that like there's policies that would make our lives better or improve individuals' lives, but they just have you hating your neighbor and hating Trump or hating Biden, like calling Biden some sort of like left nut job. I mean, it's crazy. Like Biden is a Republican. Like it just drives me crazy. Anyway, I don't get it. I don't understand that piece of it, and I just want us to stop fighting with each other. And I think a third party could bring people together, which is why people should consider it from my perspective. But I want to know from your perspective why, and you talked a little bit about this, but why should people consider a third party now when it's, the most important election of our lifetime, as they all are? And how do you and the party plan to have ballot access so people can actually vote for you?
Great, really important questions. So, like why consider a third party? One of the responses to that is that the American people are demanding a third party. So that's like why it's really important to consider it. And, there's just been such a history of cumulative failure by the two parties, which are bought and paid for by bankers and billionaires and fossil fuel barons and the usual suspects kind of hold a monopoly on the two major parties. So it's kind of like beyond needing an explanation. It's sort of like you'd have to explain why you wouldn't want a third party when the two that exist are very busy throwing you under the bus and have been basically lying and misleading you for decades. Why would you not, demand a third party? And it's only because there's such a nonstop wall-to-wall propaganda campaign about how we can only have two choices and how it's a very dangerous thing if you let people start expressing their wishes politically, how dangerous that is. That just requires a nonstop propaganda campaign. And once you step outside of it, you realize it's just totally ridiculous. There are so many reasons to have a third party right now, and the thing that people complain about, which is that, oh, you're going to spoil the election, you're going to throw it one way or the other, is nonsense. The largest voting group are the non-voters, the eligible voters who don't vote. In 2016, my last campaign, they were 100 million people. And Greens, it's been shown by talking to people and by polls, if people who vote Green are people who otherwise overwhelmingly will stay home. We're not taking away votes that belonged to someone. Votes belong to the voter. And any candidate who tells you that your vote belongs to them, by definition, should be ineligible for consideration of your vote, because
Right.
that's just a basic anti-democratic position to take. And we shouldn't have to defend our right to a vote. Our whole democracy is premised on the right to vote, which means you get to choose. Because what good is your vote if you're simply carrying out marching orders for the ruling parties? That's not a vote. And the notion that the Democrat owns your vote is outrageous. They have to earn your vote. And, again, if they think they're entitled to it, then they should not even be considered. So I've become personally just like really disgusted by this question and how it is used to like keep people brain dead. It's used to help people like not think, so that they will simply carry out the marching orders of the political elites who are very busy throwing them under the bus. And I encourage people to remember a couple things. So one is the most spoiled election ever for Democrats was 2010, the midterms of 2010. What happened then? Basically, the Democrats were punished for throwing out 8 million homeowners from their homes while they bailed out Wall Street. That was a Democratic trifecta that implemented that policy. They were punished. And that's when people became, they weren't voting for Trump. They were voting, well, that was in subsequent elections. They weren't voting, they're voting against Democrats. And it's not like, third parties did this. In 2010, there were no third parties in that election. At least not that I'm aware of, but the Democrats lost 1,000 state representative seats in legislatures. They lost 64 congressional seats. They lost 12 Senate seats and 13 governorships. It was a total defeat for Democrats. And it's that problem that the Democrats are spoiling this for themselves by abandoning their base and their principles. And that didn't just happen in 2008, but it became, really very evident. Because in 2008, why did that crash happen? Because the safeguards that had been implemented after the earlier crash in the Great Depression, those safeguards, especially separating out investment banks from commercial banks, so that big bankers and financial manipulators could not gamble with your money. They can gamble with their own money, fine, but it's your money they want to gamble with. And so the safeguards for that were destroyed by who? Larry Summers, under Bill Clinton. They're the ones who repealed the that basic protection, and that came crashing down in 2008. And who was it that Obama appointed to be head of the Treasury? It was Larry Summers, the guy who had destroyed protections for the public interest in the economy and created really the basis for that very crash. So it's been long in coming. The Democrats have been a very sold out party for a long time. It's not that they're more sold out than Republicans. It's just that they pretend not to be. So it's by abandoning their base that they have spoiled the election. And it's really important to throw that back at anybody who tells you you have to keep voting Democrat. It's just bullshit. And yes.
And I can tell you, as I would not have voted in 2016 or 2020 in the general election if there wasn't a green on the ballot.
Yeah. And that is the rule rather than the exception. So the polls don't reflect that at all, because the polls are all drawing from a limited number of people. And they may say, well, how would you vote if third parties were in, and how would they vote if third parties weren't in? But that's not the reality of actually the actual electorate in an election, where there is this largest block of voters that can't be accounted for really in a poll, because they're not really answering the polls. These are disempowered and alienated voters who are going to vote if they hear about you and they have something to actually vote for. So you can't use the polls in advance of an election to say, see, you guys are spoiling it. That's just not the way it works. That's just not reality. And we have to reject. This is just a propaganda scheme, and we just have to stand up to it. Not only because it's wrong and because it is anti-democratic, but because our lives are on the line right now. This is not something just to do for like the climate or for a sustainable economy or for jobs. This is like us. It's like, are you going to keep a roof over your head? Because right now, half of renters are severely economically stressed, just trying to keep that roof over their head. And then they got a gazillion other expenses too. People are really, really struggling right now, and people are really, really sick. And society and our sick food system and the whole thing, and the unavailability of pharmaceuticals, Joe Biden pretends that they are solving this problem through the Inflation Reduction Act, but it basically called for 10 pharmaceuticals to have, bulk purchasing to bring down the price. 10. What a joke, and not until 2026 either. So this is just nonsense. It's really important to reject their propaganda. And yes, Trump is scary, but Biden is scary too. The Democrats, they throw their opposition off the ballot. They have made a big deal announcing that they're going after us, yours truly and others. They are going after us in this election to basically use dirty tricks and legal maneuvers to try to throw us off the ballot. And they actually say this. This is how clueless they are. They actually say this. They say the quiet part out loud. They're announcing their dirty tricks.
They've gotten cocky.
They are manipulating democracy. They're doing what they accuse the Russians of doing, basically, of lying and cheating and unfairly manipulating our elections, which unfortunately at the end of the day, they could not demonstrate, not happening in any big way as far as Russians were concerned. That was kind of a made up propaganda campaign as well. Yeah, there's a little bit of that going on, but it wasn't mostly about elections.
So it was 120K of memes. That's what it was. It was like about 120K of memes on Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. And many of them weren't even about the election, so.
Exactly. I think too, and I want to be cognizant of time. There's two other things I really want to get your take on for sure. I think, first of all, I'm sorry to make you answer that question again. I know I get sick of it too. And then I've had some very heated battles. I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not a Biden supporter, obviously, either. But throwing him off the ballot is the worst thing. And the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I show this book all the time, 1984. We're sleepwalking into it. And we got to be careful because it could be coming from Joe Biden and the Democrats.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they are as full of, deception and manipulation. I mean, look, where is the assault on free speech and, freedom of the press? Yeah, the Republicans are part of it, but it's the Democrats who are really leading the charge, in their hearings, their congressional hearings where they went after Matt Taibbi for basically exposing collusion on Twitter, where government is basically telling big tech what to censor. And we're seeing this again now with TikTok, and the effort to shut down TikTok is all about shutting down maybe the least controlled, the least censored, big social media platform where young people are, able to express their discontent and, just to have a public square, a forum, which is essential for democracy. So yeah, I mean, it's outrageous. Instead of banning TikTok, let's ban corporate bailouts. Let's ban, further billions of dollars for genocide. There's so many good things we could be banning right now, not banning more on our freedom of speech. And the Democrats there have been leading the charge. They're leading the charge on genocide right now. What is more a trademark of fascism than genocide? And it's just staggering. And it's not just the White House, it's Congress. It's both parties in Congress, but it's definitely the Democratic White House that has given the green light to the genocide in Gaza right now and told Israel, no, we're always with you. Don't worry. Joe Biden could pick up the phone right now and do what Ronald Reagan did in the 1980s, where Reagan basically said to, I think it was Menachem Begin at the time, in Israel, that no, you gotta bring your troops back from Lebanon. It's not okay to be conducting this war in Lebanon. Which was basically an extension of the war against the PLO. But, they'd gone into Lebanon and it was a disaster. And Reagan said, stop it, so they did, Yeah. This war and the genocide would not be taking place without U.S. weapons and U.S. political cover. We block all the UN resolutions. All other parties in the world, see this as the genocide that it is.
And it's such a Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, as a Jew myself growing up after the Holocaust, this was like all about what we were learning, that genocide must never happen again, not to anyone. And to see this is like, what else do you call this when people are being targeted? When there are, uh, assassins basically with guns waiting for people to come out and go looking for food and killing them, doing the same to hospital staff. When 80% of all buildings have been leveled, when 2 million people basically are denied food and water. We are on a death watch right now for all 2 million people who are surviving under just astonishing conditions. This is a game of fish in a barrel.
These are innocent people. And I haven't met a single Jewish person, individual human being that wants a genocide. Like both sides, we're not even in control of what these governments are doing as a people. And that's what's so frustrating and why I don't like talking about it, because it isn't black and white. It's a very nuanced situation. I mean, the genocide's black and white. I mean, the way people feel about it's a nuanced situation.
It is. I mean, and it's a difficult conversation, but I think it's really important to make the facts clear, and they are as clear as day. They are rolling out on our computer screens and our iPhones every day that innocent people are being slaughtered right now. Yeah, there's a lot of history to this conflict. There always is in any genocidal situation. There's always a history of conflict, a history of tit for tat, and so on. But the bulk of that goes back to before the founding of the State of Israel, because Israel was founded on enormous ethnic cleansing and violence that began really from well before the State of Israel was declared. There was a very purposeful move of, that was propelling Jewish refugees who were, desperate and traumatized, and illustrate really why being genocided yourself does not then justify your committing genocide. There's no doubt, about the horrors that Jews were inflicted on Jews, starting long before the Holocaust. My family, came here fleeing pogroms in Russia and Poland, and where 5- and 6-year-olds were being conscripted into the Russian army. So there's a whole history here that goes long back, but this is what, Gandhi referred to as an eye for an eye until we're all blind. That cycle of violence has to stop. And yeah, October 7th was horrific, but there was horrific violence that preceded it. So one episode of violence doesn't justify the next episode of violence. And we just need to comply with international law here, period, which says that use of food as a weapon, starvation is being used as a weapon. This is, everyone concurs, including, Joseph Borrell with the EU, who's like a major foreign policy figure, has also been calling them out. I mean, you even now have the U.S. Senator from Maryland, I forget his name, but he's also calling out now that continuing aid to Israel, while it is violating international law, while it is committing genocide, and while it is interfering with the distribution of humanitarian aid, which it totally is, that's the blockade here right now. It's Israel's doing. There's nothing God-given about this. The famine could end in the blink of an eye if Israel gave the okay. It is outrageous and a violation of U.S. law for us to continue funding Israel in any way right now, while it is essentially committing genocide, and it is. And whether you just want to call it violations of international law or human rights, whatever you want to call it, the basis for denying aid to Israel is just undeniable right now on all sides. That will get things to stop. And then we have to use international law to move forward. We can't just make this up on the fly. The U.S. invented a whole new kind of set of terminology to do an end run around international law. But we're top dog now, hardly. We've been top dog for a century, but we're not going to be. And we ourselves are going to be in a position of needing international law very soon. In fact, we are right now. So we need to stop violating international law, stop degrading it. And what's going on in Gaza right now goes way beyond Gaza, because it is, it's normalizing the torture and murder of children on a mass scale. And it is about throwing out international law. So we have to end both of those things here. And it's not only for the sake of Gaza, it's also for the sake of Israel, who is
Yes.
an absolute pariah. I mean, as a Jew, I feel like this is the most anti-Semitic generating thing that you could imagine, is for Israel to be in this position of committing genocide against especially women and children. This is just horrific. And if you wanted to generate resentment against Jews, this is how you do it. So it's awful on that score. It's awful because all of Israel's neighbors now are being mobilized against it. And there's enormous firepower when you add that all up, including Iran and including Iran's collaboration now with Russia. There's all the firepower in the world right now, which makes the final point is that we're all in the target hairs on this, because this is like a pre-World War I set of complex alliances, but with nuclear weapons thrown in. And whenever you have a nuclear exchange now, you cannot make the mistake of thinking it's over there, because one nuclear armed submarine holds the equivalent of 4,000 Hiroshima bombs, which is enough to throw the entire world into nuclear winter, that is to depress agricultural production so much that we all starve, or at least half of us will starve. And this is a civilization ending insult. So when we think about conflict, including in the Middle East, including about Gaza, we need to see ourselves in the crosshairs of this conflict. And for all of our sakes, we need to get with the program here and start, complying with international law and human rights and diplomacy, instead of using, pure militarism and economic brute force to dominate the world. So there's a larger solution here, which is within our reach, and there is no other way forward. So we have no choice.
I agree. And you say, I'm curious, and is a little bit of a backtrack. I remember I got blamed for Trump. You got blamed for Trump for real, like, in the whole world. Like, how did that make you feel in 2016 when everybody, the whole Democratic Party, turned against you again? They did in 2012. How did that make you feel when people were just blaming you for running a campaign in a democracy?
That's actually been the case since my first entry into political contention, going all the way back to 2002. In fact, in that race where I was running for governor in Massachusetts, Mitt Romney was the Republican, there was a Democrat. Other independents appeared out of the blue. I think they were basically concocted and were tools of the Democratic Party to try to fuzzy up the opposition. But you had then all of the living Kennedys and Clintons, or at least all who were big names. They all got out at the end as that election approached, and they came out with the slogan that a vote for Stein is a vote for Romney. And
Jesus.
there's nothing new going on here. This is about a ruling elite that does not want competition, and they will do whatever it takes. This is what they are doing this time. So I was really quite used to this by the time, 2016 rolled along. And to me, it was laughable, and it was really just pathetic that people bought into that. And to my mind, that was just a real giveaway that people had no sense of strategy and no perspective on propaganda. But I think we're in a different place now, because all of those smear campaigns have been proven absolutely false. I was investigated for 3 years by the Senate Intelligence Committee on this question of, oh, you're a Russian asset. And they couldn't come up with anything. And they finally basically wrote an exoneration, like on page 800 approximately of their fifth report. So of course this never saw the light of day, but we were completely exonerated. In fact, they thanked me for my full cooperation and basically said there's nothing to see here, which there wasn't. There never was. It was really just a concocted thing. That photograph which circulated, that had been public record for a long time. And when did they start to circulate it and drum up this paranoia, this Russia smear? It was the day that I was nominated for the Green Party presidential candidacy. That's when they took it out. It was already about a year old at that point, and they
They were waiting for their moment.
And they're going to try and do it again, but I think their credibility has just gone down the tubes. And the Senate Intelligence Committee, in fact, had put out a report by this corporation. I don't have the name in my head at the moment, but they've since been dissolved because this report, which pretended to show Russian influence on social media,
Oh, I know which one you're talking about. Oh, what's it called? Go ahead.
Yeah, it'll come to me in a minute. The new something or other. But shortly after their report came out, they were exposed for having interfered in the special Senate election in Alabama in 2017. They did a so-called Russian false flag where they pretended they were Russian impersonators on social media to throw the election to the Democrat. They were basically implicating the Republican. So it was exactly what they were accusing the Russians of, but there was no evidence that the Russians were doing this in any meaningful way. But here they were showing that this corporation that made a very big deal out of exposing Russian disinformation, it was false flag. And he then demanded that they retract their report, which they did not do, and they still have not done. But that corporation had to dissolve because they were basically exposed for being fraud. They were fraud. And they should be held accountable for fraud. They have not been, but they should be. And that's so much of what that Russian disinformation smear was about. It was basically systematic fraud to try to manufacture evidence of that. So that's where that campaign has gone, this, Russia smear campaign. That's where it's gone. They're going to try to resurrect it again, but
I can't wait.
Armed. Yeah, exactly. Let them try. And, they have been in the business of dirty tricks for a long time, including what they did to Matthew Ho's Senate race in, I think it was 2018, it might have been 2020 in North Carolina, where they were actually calling people who signed his petition to get on the ballot, they were calling them, pretending to be the Green Party and demanding that they retract their names on the petition. But they made the mistake of calling the head of the Green Party who recorded the conversation. So we actually have this recording and it's been published. So this is what they do.
That's election interference. That's real election interference.
It absolutely is. And so, the evidence of that was used in court to reverse their effort to throw Matt Ho, the Green, off the ballot. But it wasn't challenged in a bigger way. I mean, they should be in jail for this.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy who heads this is their lead dirty trickster. Mark Elias is his name. He was the legal, kind of the head of the legal team for John. And he also helped coordinate all these law offices across the country to simultaneously launch lawsuits against Ralph Nader. He was fighting something like 20 or 24 different lawsuits at one time. This was in, I think, his 2004 race, I believe. This is what they do. I mean, it's outrageous that they're allowed to do this. And now they are declaring in advance that this is what they're going to do. It's like, okay, great. You just incriminated yourself here.
Right.
And they should
show your cards.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Yeah. They should be held. And we will be going very big public on this and put their dirty tricks as they go forward, because they just now admitted to the world they're about to perform dirty tricks.
Do it right in front of our faces, and we're just like, whatever. So good. That's good. I know we're a little over with the time. Do you have 2 more minutes for one more?
Sure.
Okay. Censorship has become my number one issue. It used to be healthcare. That's why I worked on Obama's campaign in 2008 and got activated into politics and activism. Now it's censorship. Julian Assange. I know you touched on censorship with TikTok, so we know your stance on that. But what would you do with Julian Assange on your first day as president or your consequent days?
On day one, Julian Assange walks free, as does Edward Snowden, as does Daniel Hale, who exposed, the fallacy around these so-called, targeted drone assassinations. They're wildly, killing innocent people, and he went to jail, so-called high security isolation, just completely dehumanized conditions, as well as Leonard Pelletier and many others who are political prisoners. They all go free on day one.
I'm glad to hear that.
With damages, I would like to add,
Yeah,
with damages, they need to be awarded for the destruction of their lives that's taken place here. Yeah,
I completely agree. And then is there anything you want to ask me to finish up? And I will answer super quick.
my main question was, so like, how did you get involved in all of this? So you've kind of given something of an answer there by way of healthcare as being your first like election issue. And I wonder, was that actually how you got going here? Was it healthcare struggles?
Yeah, so I'm 38 years old, so I grew up coming out of college in that 2008, 2010 spot. And I grew up working class, poor, factory jobs gone, all of that stuff. Kind of messed up my family, lost our house, my parents divorced. It was tough. We moved around a lot, didn't know where meals were coming from all the time. My dad had to move back home twice in his 20s and early 30s just because we couldn't make it. So I was going to school because I was going to break the cycle of that because that wasn't going to be around anymore. And so I went to school, did everything I was supposed to do, took out the 50K in debt, which thanks to interest is now 60K in debt. Paid for community college myself, my first few years, working full time while going to school full time, hustling, hustling, hustling. First job out of college, get laid off. And it was 2010, get laid off. And then, I keep doing everything right. I work in marketing for software, but in 2008, I didn't have healthcare. I'm like, what am I going to do if I get sick? Obama talked about healthcare and college and, affordable college and all that stuff. And I got involved. And then I kind of fell off in 2012. And I was like, I'll reluctantly vote for him. I wasn't active in the campaign. 2016 came. I was like, I don't care anymore. And then someone told me, Bernie Sanders is running. And I was like, that's the guy that wants to label GMOs. I like him. And so I looked into him, got involved there. We know how that went. Got involved in your campaign after he was cheated. And then again, 2020, the whole Bernie thing. I ended up voting for Howie Hawkins in the primary, didn't get involved after Bernie. And I'm just I feel it's so much of what I've seen. And it's part of the reason I call the show Eyes Wide Open is because like, you've got to know what's going on and the game that's being played. And part of my show here is to help people share their stories. And cover things that are going on in our culture and our mental health challenges and eating right and all of these things that are really destroying the foundation. So I feel similar to how you said, like, well, somebody has to do it. And if no one else is going to do it, I'm going to do it, which has also led me now to start a whole movement. I'm from reality TV. I was on a reality TV show. And now I'm trying to organize reality casts into a union because there's so much exploitation. And so anyway, I can't help myself. I see something wrong and I need to do something about it.
I love it.
No.
Wow, that's such a powerful story. Thank you so much for sharing it. And I think that is so much like where people are at right now. People don't want to add, activism and responsibility for our communities to our daily list of tasks. But I think people realize that we don't get out of this alive unless we really harness the power of our collective wisdom and our collective mobilization. And I guess I want to close us out with two things. One is Frederick Douglass, who said that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will, which is why we've got to be in the fight. And then what Alice Walker said, which is that the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. Do have it. And once you're in it and you're part of that community of struggle, it is transformational, and we don't want to take it on. But actually, once you're a part of this struggle, it really, it really supercharges your life, and it anchors you in a whole universe of purpose and higher vision. So I really encourage people to get on board and, to support this show. And thank you so much for what you do, which is the living embodiment of opposing censorship. I mean, this is what the First Amendment is for, because we cannot have lapdogs in our in our journalism. We have lapdog journalism now. We need watchdog journalism and empowering journalism, and that's what you're doing. And I want to encourage people to also go to jillstein2024.com and join the struggle, because there are just so many ways to be a part of it, and it is empowering. And just real quickly on the ballot access fight, we have like 75% of the work done. We are now on, I think it's 21 ballots. There are several more that we will be making successfully within the next 2 to 3 weeks. So those numbers will be going up. We are basically in process all over the country. We expect to be on the ballot across the country. We will be the one pro-worker, anti-war, anti-genocide, climate emergency choice that will be on the ballot in enough states that we could actually win power, and we expect it to be all states. But we are actually very close right now to the 270 electoral votes that we could potentially have. We're just about there right now, but we expect to be on them all, to be, fully engaged, going full bore, challenging empire, whose days are really over. And the sooner we remove the oligarchs from power, the more quickly and easily we're going to get ourselves back on a course that actually serves the interests of people, planet, and peace, instead of profit, which is the one driver right now. We can have an America in a world that works for all of us. We are on track to do that. And I encourage people to get involved in the campaign. We do have several big struggles ahead of us still. By the way, it will cost us around $1 to $2 million to complete our ballot drive. RFK says it will cost him at least $20 million. No Labels is going for $70 million to get on the ballot. We can do this because we're a grassroots network. We're a people-powered team, and I encourage people to join that, especially if you are in New York, Illinois, and Indiana. Those are some of the biggest battles that lie ahead. We expect to do it, but the more hands on deck, the more volunteers who are helping to collect signatures, the more quickly and easily this will get done. And I would say, let your expectations go wild in this campaign. And in this election.
Anything can happen.
Anything can happen. And there's every reason for us to completely upset the apple cart right now. There's a very powerful coalition across the political spectrum that can unify right now around our key issues, including censorship, our civil liberties, which are under assault, our democracy, which is under assault, money in politics, the empire, and the highway robbery being committed. The average household, by the way, is spending $12,000 this year on our endless war machine. It's been at least $50,000 since 9/11, and this is according to Jeffrey Sachs and the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. So there's a lot of academic and analytic power behind these numbers. We are being impoverished and endangered by the rule of empire and oligarchy. It's time to draw that to a close and enter into the community of nations as part of the multipolar world that we are going forward. It needs to be sustainable. It needs to work for all of us, or it's not going to work for any of us. So let's make it happen. Go to jillstein2024.com and join that team. And all the best, Nick, to you.
Thank you.
Program, opening up lots of eyes, and you do that so beautifully. So keep up your work, and I hope to be in touch.
I appreciate that. All of those links will be in the show notes. I'll be joining here in Illinois, so we'll make sure we get you on the ballot.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, wonderful.
All right.
And if
Thank you so much.
To our newsletter, you'll see when we'll be visiting, because we will be coming back to Illinois in particular very soon. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Take care.
Thanks. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. Do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.